Moving on, more breaking inputs on the broadcast. Donald Trump's latest post on ceasefire. There will be no uranium enrichment, which was one of the conditions in the 10-point plan. So this is the latest coming in from Donald Trump. He has put out a post on Truth Social a short while earlier. Donald Trump says, and I quote, "The United States will work closely with Iran, which we have determined has gone through what will be a very productive regime change. There will be no enrichment of uranium, and the United States working with Iran dig up and remove all of the deeply buried nuclear dust. It is now and has been under very exacting satellite surveillance. Nothing has been touched from the date of attack. We are and will be talking tariff and sanctions relief with Iran." Many of the 15 points have already been agreed to. And then he says, "Thank you for your attention to this matter." So this is the latest coming in from Donald Trump. Says we will work very closely with Iran, but there will be no uranium enrichment. Donald Trump's latest post certainly will get sharp reactions from the Iranian side as well. So he continues to say that we will work closely with Iran as far as the uranium enrichment condition is there, that he does not agree to, that US will not agree to, but will discuss tariff and sanctions relief. So negotiations will continue. He's also talking about regime change in this latest post. Donald Trump says, as far as uranium enrichment is concerned, it's a clear no to that. But he does touch upon the subject of regime change. And this is how he starts his post. US will work closely with Iran, which we have determined has gone through what will be a very productive regime change. Let me quickly go across to our expert, our guest who's joining us on the broadcast. We have Bob McNally, founder and president of Rapidon Energy Group and former White House advisor. So I was just telling our viewers about the latest reactions and developments coming in. The entire focus also is on the Strait of Hormuz, which Mr. McNally will never go back to how it was before the war. As per several reports, Iran plans to collect a toll fees. And Iran has made it absolutely clear. Before the war, of course, Strait of Hormuz was free. But now that authority over the Strait of Iran gets legitimized in a way.
Yeah, good to be with you. So I think there is still a lot of confusion, contradiction, and uncertainty this morning. The only thing we know for sure, and traders and analysts and consumers and industry knows for sure in Asia, Europe, and the United States, is that the devastating attack that was underway last night was called off at the last minute. But the details, as you described them, announced by Iran and the United States regarding a 2-week ceasefire are vague and contradictory. And so I think it is way too early to signal the all clear. And traders will be focused on one thing and one thing only. Will boats resume transits of the Strait of Hormuz at anything close to pre-conflict levels? And I think that remains to be seen. So the market was ready for relief. Investors were ready for a happy story. And we've got an enormous sell-off in crude oil and a rise in equity markets. The nightmare, many hope, is over. But I think it's too soon to be celebrating.
Right. So let me ask you, so Iran saying that it will now collect toll fees. One, isn't that against the international laws? Two, if Iran starts doing that, do you think there'll be some leeway for countries, friendly nations?
Yes, so there is one example of contradiction. The president talks about safe, immediate, and complete restoration of flows. Iran talks about checking in with the Iranian military, technical limitations, and by some reports, fees. It's an international waterway. It's not clear that Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait would agree to resume production and exports if Iran was allowed to collect a toll on an international waterway. So that's a great example of the contradictions that we still see here and the uncertainty that still hangs over this crisis despite the sell-off last night.
Would you agree that Strait of Hormuz now is not just a passage and oil is not just a commodity but a global geopolitical weapon system?
No question. My firm and I at Rapidan Energy Group saw this coming. We did a big report and study with military officers helping us last June. We knew that investors were way too complacent about the risk of a conflict and the duration of a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is important for energy, but also, as India knows well, agriculture and industrial inputs and so forth. So the world has learned a tough lesson about how important that mother of all choke points is for global commerce and global growth, energy included.
Mr. McNally, does this also not set a very dangerous precedent wherein strategic waterways will be turned into revenue-generating pathways?
Absolutely. It would be a terrible precedent. It would encourage all kinds of bad behavior by other countries that can threaten these kind of waterways. It would be a breakdown in global order and trade and so forth and stability. And it's hard for me to imagine that the United States would end this conflict, leaving Iran strengthened and an ability to sort of extort tolls, not only tolls, but other concessions, diplomatic concessions, foreign policy concessions, military concessions. In that event, Iran would have won this conflict, even though it's battered. It can replace people. It can restock weapons. It can rebuild buildings. But if it emerges in charge of the world's most important choke point, it would be a huge victory for Iran.
Do stay on with us, sir. Donald Trump is constantly putting out posts, and you know how when he speaks, things change every single time. Let me quickly tell our viewers about the latest that we are picking up. Donald Trump has put out another post on Truth Social. Donald Trump says, and I quote, "A country supplying military weapons to Iran will be immediately tariffed on any and all goods sold to the United States of America, 50% effective immediately. There will be no exclusions or exemptions." So Donald Trump first said uranium enrichment is a big no. And now he's saying the countries that are backing Iran will have to face tariffs immediately. Mr. McNally continues to be with us on the broadcast. Earlier, J.D. Vance called it a fragile truce. Iran says that they managed to get this ceasefire on their own terms, but given the kind of statements coming in from Donald Trump, looks like, just one small mistake, just one trigger, and things will go south.
Absolutely. The vice president is absolutely correct. Fragile probably understates this. It understates it. There have been reports of attacks continuing against Israel, against Kuwait, even overnight after the ceasefire supposedly went into effect. And with regard to the president's post, I'm just seeing it now for the first time, but this would mean that we would put a 50% incremental tariff on China, which does send weapons to Iran. I find that hard to believe. We threatened enormous tariffs on China last April. Equity markets collapsed. The world was facing a downturn, and we walked back from that. So I think even that most recent post just reflects the enormous uncertainty, contradiction, and to use the vice president's term, fragility in the arrangements that we're seeing now in markets.
Well, let me ask you, in case the ceasefire collapses, and nobody wants that, but in case the ceasefire collapses, how would the next escalation impact the markets?
Well, let's hope it doesn't collapse. But the risk is we go back to where we were last night, where this restraint that both sides have shown with regard to attacking critical energy infrastructure erodes. And we start to see major terminals, major stabilization plants, facilities that, if damaged, would lengthen the outage, even if Strait of Hormuz reopened. That is the big risk, that we have a much bigger disruption. You know, this is already the world's largest energy disruption by far. But if we reopen Hormuz, it can end over time. However, if we go back to expanding the conflict to critical infrastructure, then it's with us a long time. So let's hope that doesn't happen.
Right. Now, as far as, the oil prices going down is concerned, do you believe that's just an illusion created because of the ceasefire announcement that has happened?
I wouldn't say it's an illusion. We did avoid a devastating escalation of the conflict last night. That deserved some relief sell-off in oil, and so that it was deserved. However, I'm skeptical that it will stick, because I don't see this conflict having been concluded. And as again, we're talking about it, I think this quote unquote ceasefire is vague, uncertain, and fragile.
All right. Now, let me ask you this as well. Do you think that this conflict, which you say is not over yet, has changed the global energy order? And if yes, then how? If you could just explain.
I think in some ways, yes. I think the world will look to improve energy security in a way it hasn't thought about in perhaps 40 or 50 years. There will be projects to avoid the Strait of Hormuz. There will be a desire to increase strategic stock holdings, including in countries like India. People will see to their energy security much more seriously than they have in the past. However, this conflict won't change the reality that hydrocarbons, oil, gas, coal, remain 80% of the world's energy. I don't think it's going to lead to a rapid takeover of electric vehicles. There will be some movement toward energy efficiency and electrification, but I don't think we're about to see a big change on that front. So the world will be reacquainted with the realities. Oil, gas, coal are what matter to keep the economy's flowing, living standards rising, and now we have to see to security, security, security. You know, we talk often about supply chains in critical minerals and other things. We're about to learn that there's an old supply chain, an important one with a choke point called the Strait of Hormuz, and I think countries will be very interested in improving that security front.
Now, Donald Trump said that only a complete surrender would work. Otherwise, this won't stop. And now we've seen him agree to the 10-point plan, which, of course, is going back on through the latest post. But he did say that this is workable in terms of the 10-point plan that came United States' way. Do you think Iran, after being hit and taking those blows, despite that, managed to get this concession from US, and that changes the world order, that changes the balance of power?
So I think President Trump, as you noted, says all kinds of things, very different from time to time. And I think what's more important is to look at what the negotiators, what the vice president, if we start those talks on April 10th in Islamabad, what they really demand and what are the substance of the agreement. We've learned now to maybe downplay what we hear President Trump say and instead focus on facts and reality on the ground. But to answer your question, the Iranian 10-point plan is nowhere close to a durable settlement that the world could accept. Absolutely not. It's an Iranian wish list, and I think far from any final settlement we would see.
Okay, it's far from any final settlement, says Mr. Bob McNally. Thank you very much, sir, for giving us your time, and thank you for taking those questions.